Hey, what's up, everybody? So tonight we're going to continue our rod build. First thing we're going to do is we're going to put the tip top. Let's see, where's the camera at? There it is. So we're going to put the tip top on. All right. That's usually the thing I do after everything's glued up, set up. And this is actually a little repair you probably need to do because every one of us has broken off a rod tip. And so you can go to Academy, Dick's, Walmart, wherever, and you can get some repairs for these things. Get a kit of these and some glue, and so it's good to know how to do this. I mean, there's a lot of YouTube videos that show you how to do it, so it's not like I'm going to be really revolutionary here, but I'll go ahead and show it to you if you hadn't done it before. So anyway, the first thing I usually try to do is line it up with a reel seat, and the reason why I like to do this is because then I can line all my guides up with the tip, so it just makes it easy. So what I'll do, always make sure you have a pair of pliers because this stuff does get hot. You need a lighter of some kind. Typically I like these barbecue grill lighters. They seem to work quite well, and you know, they're pretty easy to handle. So what I'm going to do is typically I just take the rod tip, you know, first, and I go ahead. Let me see if I can adjust this camera, maybe where you guys can see. All right, I'll try to hold that in place there. But all I'm going to do is I'm just going to light up the end of this glue stick, you know, and get it hot where it starts to drip. And then I'm going to put a little bit on the tip of the rod. Once I do that, then I can go ahead and place the tip top on there, and right this very second I'm not going to worry too much about exact placement because I'm going to heat it back up just because we're working on film or on camera here. I'm not going to worry too much about its placement at this point. Hi. So I'm really kind of struggling to keep this thing in focus here. But what I'll do, I'm going to go ahead and go off camera. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to line up that tip top. Let's see. Hi. Anyway, I'm going to line up this tip top with that reel seat, so that way it's you know, dead in line. So it's a pretty simple operation. A little bit of heat, the right glue, you know, and this is where my pliers are going to come in handy. I'm going to heat that back up and make a quick adjustment on it. So I'm going to do that off camera, and then we're going to talk about wrapping the rod. All right, and so once you get it lined up, you can just take a fingernail, just kind of pull all that glue off with your fingernail. There's always going to be extra on there, but I just pull it off. So anyway, that's kind of the rest of that operation. So it's, like I said, it's something you need to learn how to do. We all break rod tips off. So you just need some rod tips of the right size. I keep, you know, some spares now. I buy all my stuff off Mudhole, so I'll get, you know, all various colors and sizes to you know, kind of match whatever it is I've used, you know, on my rods. So that way I have, you know, spares as in case the inevitable, you know, happens. But anyway, once that's done, then we can start wrapping the rods, and we're going to talk about that here in a minute. Wrapping the guides on them, sorry. All right, so let's talk about some of the tools of the trade when you're actually wrapping the guides onto the fishing rod. Here's some things that you need. So one of the first things we need, they sell these little scissors, these little spring-loaded scissors on Mudhole. I really like these for cutting the thread. Got to have razor blade, just a standard issue razor. Bought one of these burnishing tools, and we'll kind of go into what this thing does for you here in a few minutes. Believe it or not, you need a file. So what this does, if you look at a lot of the guides, you'll see that they're painted or they have some kind of a surface on them, and what you want to do is take all the paint off, and you want a nice sharp transition down to that guide, because when you're wrapping the thread on it, you want it to go right straight up onto the guide and not, get wrapped up underneath, or there be this, kind of a gap, between where the guide foot starts and where the rod is. You want that to be a nice sharp transition so the thread just rides straight up. So this is just a CRB spinning guide kit, pretty standard. This is not a real expensive kit. This is just something I wanted to have some fun with and build something that looked cool. But anyway, on the back, they'll give you guide spacing. So if you bought a 6 foot, 6.5, 7 foot rod, they sell them in kind of lengths of the rod. Actually, this one's 6.6 to 7.6. So it actually gives you the guide spacing from the tip end. And so we'll be putting these on a little bit later, but you need these and the file. Let's see if I'll pop one of these out. Hopefully I can get close enough up where you can see what I'm talking about. It's sometimes it's a little bit difficult maybe to see on camera, but I'll take the big guide out here. So let's see if okay, it's about as good as I'm going to do. Well, you can't see on there. You can't see all the black paint right there at the lip. But I'll turn it, and what you really want is a really sharp transition. So what I'll do is, here in a few minutes, I'll file this down and show you what that transition really needs to look like. That's a little too thick. So what you're really trying to do, let me try this real quick. There's a guy I follow on YouTube named Redfish Ross. He does that trick a lot. He's showing you how he sets up lures and stuff, and he'll put his hand up in front of the camera. It's a neat little trick. But I'll file this down here in a few minutes and show you what that really ought to look like. But you want a good solid transition. So, we definitely need a file. I'm going to show you, let's see, so we need, so what we need next is we need one of these little doodads. This is a hand wrapper. So all it has is a spot for 2 spools of thread. You've got a little thing here that is a tensioner. You've got a couple little eye hooks, one that slides up and back that you can kind of keep your thread going in the right spot, and then 2 spots to actually rest your rod on. And then also, sorry about all the shaking there. Let me readjust you. All right, also, you need some of these CRB rod holders, and they usually have some felt down in there. You can see this one's kind of gotten chewed up a little bit. This one, it got really chewed up when I was spinning a rod the other day, and so I just threw some tape on there so that the rod wouldn't stick to it and start wrapping this thing around. That could be a disaster if you're letting thread, your Pro Coat thread finish dry and the rod stops spinning. That's a bad deal, because you really want a nice even coat on there, and so the rod's going to have to spin at a very slow RPM. And I have one of those. We'll get into that when I actually get into the finished piece. But I at least want to show you the idea of wrapping the threads. And this is really where you can start to get kind of artistic. This does require a little patience. For me, this is the most tedious part of building a rod. The part we've done so far, it's a little bit messy, but it's not bad. It's actually kind of fun. But this part, it's the most rewarding, but it also requires the most patience. But it's also the part where I think, really you can bring out your individuality. This and the marbling that we're going to show you, or I'm going to show you as well. But there's lots of little techniques. The ones that I've used, I've showed you guys, is the olive branch. I've done some bands. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to do a red, white, and blue stripe. I think I'm going to wrap most of these in white. And I'm going to do like some red, white, and blue kind of bands in here. We'll see how it looks and see if that actually works like I think it might. So we'll see how well that turns out. I've usually done just 1 thread underneath. I haven't done 2. So I don't know if it'll work or not. So I may be reshooting this after that. But I'm going to go ahead and turn my active on camera up so we can look down as well and not just look at me. I think that'll give you a lot better perspective on what it is I'm going to do. And I've zoomed in a little bit, so hopefully you'll be able to see kind of up close what I'm doing. And if not, I can at least talk you through it. So actually, there's a couple of other things that I did not show you that you need. One is I use a piece of braided line to pull the thread back through when I get finished wrapping. And you also need some really skinny masking tape. I usually use, I think it's a 1/4 inch masking tape is what I'm typically using for wrapping the guides and doing the work that I'm about to do here. Trying to make sure I stay lined up on that. So one of the first things I'm going to do here is, since I'm going to kind of play around with this red, white, and blue, is I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to clip off some blue thread. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to tape it actually on both sides. I'm just going to run it along the top of the rod. And the reason I'm going to do that is because I'm going to use it in the middle of the white. And so you'll kind of see why I do this here in a minute, but it's a little trick, and it can get a little bit, you know, goofy. You can kind of wrap this blue thread around the rod a bunch of times, you know, when you're working on this. But it's a little trick that I've seen people use, you know, out on YouTube, where you know, some of the more experienced guys, they've kind of showed this little trick. So I'll just try to get it to run along there, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap actually over that. And then this is actually going to be used kind of in the middle of my decorative wrapping here next to the winding checks. So I just throw a little piece of tape on there. And actually, I'm going to do the same with red as well. Actually just run it under the same pieces of tape. But anytime you're doing a band or something in the middle of your wrap, this is a great way to kind of keep it locked in. And you want it loose. You don't want it tight like this red one is, because you want it to be wrapped up underneath there. You don't want to really put a lot of tension on it. All right, so we're ready to get this thing underway. Hopefully you'll be able to see this from up top. I'm gonna go ahead and clip this little white. And I usually use just all D size thread. I don't use a lot of A size. You can use it for little trim bands and stuff. A lot of people prefer that. You know, for me, I find it a little hard to work with, just because it's so skinny. You know, D is about the size of maybe about 8-pound or 10-pound braid, and it's much easier to break. So I tend, and A is like spider web almost. It's really thin. So what I do is I go underneath this first eyelet, come up through the tensioner, and hopefully you can see this, and then come back down through my eyelet on my little adjustable area here. And then all I'm going to do is I'm going to come up, and I'm going to make sure this actually is a wing nut that has a locking mechanism. You know, it's like a lock nut, and you know, we've got some spacers and stuff to make sure that the thread, actually we can put a little bit of tension on it. We don't want too much. I don't want this tensioner, you know, completely bent down, you know, like you've got a 100-pound shark on an inshore rod. But you do want, you know, a nice bend so that you can keep tension on the rod. So I'll try to do this kind of in the middle. But what you're trying to do is to make sure I'm getting this right. So what I do is I wrap it around, and I try to make sure that I hold it in place. And then what's going to happen is you actually have to pull the thread over top of where you're wrapping, and then you've got to catch spot underneath, so it kind of locks in where you can start actually putting some tension on it. And now you're kind of locked in place. So I did that kind of in the middle, so I got to move it down the rod here. Hopefully I can get it moved okay. It won't get too goofy. But for me, that was one of the hardest things to learn, is exactly how to do that. And I still sometimes on the thinner parts of the rod, you know, when I get down toward the tip top, it gets a little tricky to get that right. But it's something, if you do it right, you know, you really get a good, you know, good start on your wrapping. So I just try to push everything tight up against that winding check. Oops, and actually I'm going the wrong way. So I did that wrong. So I'm just going to unwind this. But I at least wanted to show you that in the middle of the rod, so that way you can kind of get the idea. That's what we're going to be doing. So here, since we're going to be wrapping that way, I have to make sure that I get the wrap started. And I usually try to when I'm doing up against these winding checks, I don't work directly up against them. Usually I'm a little bit away from them, you know, at first. And actually, you know, I may have done that right to begin with, but it was just the fact that I had done so much work pushing that thing down that it got a little goofy. And I'm just using my fingernail to kind of push everything tight. That's actually what this little burnishing tool is it is literally to kind of push everything up tight. But typically what I like to do is you know, when I'm first doing this, is I like to kind of use my fingernail. It seems to work about as well, and I see a lot of other guys that do that too. Then there's a lot of people that'll say, you know, you don't want to get the oil from your skin, you know, anywhere close to that thread. You know, maybe that's true, I don't know. But like I said, I have typically, you know, just use my fingernail to kind of push everything up and keep it tight. There's actually another little tool. Let's see if I can find mine real quick. And if I was doing this for 4 people for a living, I would make a lot more use of this. But for me, I tend to eyeball things, and that's a micrometer. So a lot of guys, you know, they'll take, you know, very exacting measurements of how far, you know, they've come down the, you know, down the rod, or how far from the guides. I mean, you know, if I was doing this for a living, you know, for other people, I would be using the mic all the time. I actually used it a lot, you know, in golf, and you can actually use it, you know, to measure the thickness of the rod, you know, at different points too. It's extremely accurate. You know, it's down to like 1/100 of an inch. You know, it's extremely accurate. So, you know, it's a handy tool to have for what you're doing here. Now, once I've wrapped, you know, a good ways down, I really don't need this piece anymore. So what you do is this is where you take the razor blade and you just put the razor blade down on the rod, and you pull the thread against the razor blade. You never saw, because what's going to happen is that line is going to fray big time. I mean, it's going to split and do, you know, this goofiness, right? That's never a good thing when you're working with thread. What you want is a nice, you know, clean cut, you know, without, I think that was the part that I cut, but you want to keep it nice and clean. So you always put that against the blank, or put it up against the thread and pull against the blade. You never saw. So, and sometimes I still do it out of habit, but that's just something you try not to do. Now, what I usually try to do, hopefully you can see this from up above, what I usually try to do is my adjustment on the thread is I try to kind of keep it like at an angle where I'm always like really tight up against where I'm wrapping. If I have it way out here, then what's going to happen is that thread's always going to kind of walk away from the direction I'm wrapping. So I usually have it angled just inside of where I'm wrapping, And then that way, you know, each thread kind of usually there it just tried to wrap over itself, but what it tries to do is just wrap right up against the last thread that you put down. The thing that sometimes is interesting around these winding checks and some other things is you have a situation where they're not real even. You know, I mean, these are like 30, 40, 50 cent pieces. You know, they don't make them just really exacting. So, you know, sometimes I just have to you know, kind of keep working that thread until I can get it straight. And the thing about this burnishing tool is when you get done, you can just run this along the top and it'll flatten everything out and make it look good. So even if you have a few gaps here and there, you know, as you're wrapping, it's not a big deal. And you see that I'm kind of wrapping it around here, which, you know, is okay. That's kind of the part that I said was going to get a little bit messy, so that's okay. So I think from here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and start working the red and blue threads in here. Let's see how well this looks. I don't know if this is going to work. If it doesn't, I've got a plan B. I can do some other things here. Go ahead and take that tape off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually work these two threads underneath the white, and I'm going to try to keep these all in line. So I just kind of pull the white thread away, and actually where I'm going to do this is I want to do it kind of right where the reel is going to sit on top, because I won't see it. If I have any imperfections of where I work this thing in, I won't see it if I start here. Rather than if I have the rod, you know, the reel's always going to be facing down on a spinning rod. So if I have an imperfection, I want it facing away from me. So I've kind of learned that the hard way. I didn't always do that. So what I'll try to do is now line up the red, white, and blue threads together here and lay them down. Let me put my spectacles on here. This is a little tricky. Now, if you notice, I don't have to keep my hands on that white thread because I have the tensioner. But once I undo this tape, I'm going to need to keep tension on these threads to make this part of it work. Because I have to lay down here red, white, blue, and I really want this to look nice. And you've got to keep tension on the thread or it'll go haywire on you. Yeah, this actually might work. So I'm just going to make a few wraps here with it. All right. So now what I want to do is I want to lock these in place. So this is about where I entered. So this is where I want to exit. So I got to put my finger on there. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to work these red and blue strings back up underneath my white thread. And now I'm going to wrap that white thread over top so that I kind of lock those back in place. And you see I've got a gap. That's okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this tape back on just in case I want to do something else here in a minute. But I think this actually is going to look really good. So now what I can do is just kind of push everything tight. And I definitely need to pull on this blue thread a little bit. It's kind of sticking out there. What I was worried about was the exit, you know, having two threads or exiting at the same time. I've only ever done this with one thread at a time. I've never tried it with two, but that actually looks okay. Actually, it's kind of a neat effect. I'm going to take my burnishing tool here in a minute and see what I can do with it. Kind of clean it up though. Because what it looks like is some of these threads are just a little more crooked looking than I want them to, which is actually fairly typical when you're doing this kind of striping. where you want it to look good is where the thread is facing down, or the reel seat is facing down, which is this position. This actually looks really good right here. It's the underside that gets a little bit haywire. And that's, if you're gonna have it, look a little goofy, that's where you want it. That's where I kind of started in here, where it's kind of buried, where it starts and ends. So that way on top, of the rod, it's going to be pretty darn straight and look pretty good. So a lot of times I can just kind of burnish a little bit, and the stripes will actually straighten themselves out a little bit. So, all right, that looks pretty good. And like I said, what I would do from here, if I was really being a perfectionist, is I would take a mic and I would mic, okay, how far is that white? Because I want to do exactly that amount on the other side. And I'm just not that picky when I'm building stuff for myself. I just kind of eyeball it and like, yeah, it looks about right. So I'm gonna do a few more wraps here. Actually, I'm missing a step here. So this is another good thing about having this tensioner, is I can kind of undo my work a little bit because there's something I need to do. So what I have to do is I'm getting to the end of about where I'm going to work. And so this is where your braided line comes into play. So what you do is you're always going to pull it, you're going to put a loop up under here, you're going to wrap over it, and then what you're going to do is you're going to pull the thread back up under itself to lock it in place. So again, what I do is I try to find, okay, there's where the reel seat's going to be sitting, so I go ahead and put it up under there, right, and I make sure that I have a nice loop that I can hit. So I'm going to go ahead and do some wrapping over top. Probably wrap another 6 or 8 times, and don't worry about that little gap it creates. We'll use the burnishing tool to take care of that. All right, a couple more wraps here. That should be pretty good. Now, what you got to make sure of is that your braided line is ready to go here, that you're going to be ready to pull this thing out. All right, so what you got to do is you got to actually put your finger on top and hold this in place, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this white thread down here, and this little stick, the tensioner, is going to stand straight up and bang around a little bit. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually take this white thread and go down through this loop and pull it toward me. And this stuff does take a little practice. So now my hand is acting as the tensioner. And so what I do is I take it and kind of wrap it around my fingers, and then I pull tight, and then I can let it go because I have control of it with the braided line, and I just pull it right back up under itself. So that locks it in place. And then again, you do not saw here. You just take this, you open up a little gap, put it right up against there, and pop. And if you've tensioned it right, that'll actually, go right down underneath. And actually what I should have done is I should have, while I was wrapping, I should have gone ahead and cut these off. But I think I can go ahead and get them without seeing too much of their remnants. Actually, what I might do, see if I can open up that gap right there. There we go. So I just opened up a gap in that white thread and popped it from there. So now here's where you can take this burnishing tool and kind of fill in any gaps, tighten everything back up. Make sure everything's straightened up, looks good. Now I can go ahead and cut from this side too. Get this off. Put it right up against that winding check. Yep, so that gets that. So now, done a little bit of decorative wrapping. We have a little red, white, and blue band, which I think will look really cool. And away we go. So, a little red, white, and blue band. Hopefully you can see it there. You can see it up top. All right. And you can see, you know, where I enter and exit. I try to do that in a very similar location. I'm actually more on the side, but it's more in a spot like I'm going to fish it right here. So that's the part that I really want to look good. It's always going to have a little bit of imperfection in it. So you just try to pick where the imperfection is gonna land. So anyway, I think I'm gonna do that with both of these. So I'll probably go ahead and get that wrapped off camera, and then I'll probably go ahead and do the big guide. I always forget if this is called the choke guide or I know it's not the running guide, but there's names for these, and I'll go look that up so I make sure I inform you right. I'm sorry, I don't do this every day, so sometimes I forget the terminology. But I'm going to prep this one, and we're going to wrap this one as well, so that way you can see how that's done. And that'll probably conclude this part of the lesson. Then what we'll do is I'll show you how to do the pro coat and the marbling after that. But like I said, this is where you can get creative and really make something look the way you want it to. And I think also too, I've got a couple of stickers. I got the red, white, and blue fish, and I've got a red, white, and blue flag. So I'm gonna put those probably down in here somewhere. That's usually where we put stickers, is down on this butt end, because it's pretty thick. But I'll probably do that. I may do the fish on this one and then marble around it maybe. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what I decide to do with that. Okay, so hopefully you can see this. What I've done is take all the paint off of that, and you can see that I've really thinned down. It really doesn't come out as well on camera as I hope, but it's a very, very thin spot right in here. So that way the threads will run right up on the guide much better. So I wanted to at least show that up close. Let me get everything repositioned again, and we'll go ahead and wrap this one as part of this lesson. But I wanted to show that real fast. Hopefully you get it. So now that this is prepared, what I've done is, if you look on my handy dandy chart here, the first guide, or the farthest guide, called for it to be 50 3/4 inches from the tip. So I've marked that on my rod here. Don't know if you can see it on my phone, but you should be able to see it from up above. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to tape this on there so that it stays in place. Make sure that my reel seat is pointed up and that it's in line with the tip top. Otherwise, you're going to be kind of unhappy after you get done wrapping. So I'm just going to take a piece of tape. Now, what I want to do is, here's my mark. So I want to make sure that the guide is actually there. It's really easy to like put your guide foot there, forgetting what you're trying to do here. But what I'm going to do is just place this on here. And this gets a little tricky with some of the smaller guides, and actually what I'll do is I'll actually cut this tape in half. But you just need it to stay on enough where you can get the threads to run up on here. Alright, so that should be good. Let's get that repositioned just a little for you. Alright, so that's sticking up a little. That's kind of one of the challenges with some of these bigger guides, is to get the foot of the guide, because it's so darn heavy, is to get that thing to sit down flat. Alright, so now I'm down flat. Okay, and then I can take my China mark and rub that off. That's why I use the China marker, because it doesn't, it comes off really easy. Just a little bit of rubbing will take it off. So all I'm going to do now is I'm going to use the same procedure we did before, and I'm just going to start, a little ways down. I don't I don't know, I try to start, goodness, how far down do I usually go here? Let's see if I can imagine that. Maybe about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch, down and wrap up. Just kind of depends. By the way, this is called the stripper guide. The next guide in line, the next largest one is called the choke guide. And then the rest are running guides. So that'll be the choke guide. So that actually chokes the line down into the running section. And actually, a lot of times spinning rods will have a couple of choke guides before you actually get to the running guides. This kit will have 2 actually. So stripper guide, couple of choke guides, and then your running ones. So, again, you have the choice. You can be, decorative. I thought about even doing like red, white, blue, up and down this rod. I don't know. I'm trying to think of how I want to do this. Why don't we do that? Why don't we do a red one here? Maybe put a little white trim band on it or something, and then do white, then blue. I think that'll be pretty cool. We have another chance to be decorative right above the foregrip, the grip that's above the reel seat toward the stripper guide, because we're going to put our hook keeper on there. And all we're going to do with the hook keeper is we're going to put that, I'll put that probably on the top side of that, where the reel's down, and this will sit on the top side. Where I usually put that is I put it right in here. So it's right above the foregrip, right above the reel seat. So I'll do a little bit of decorative stuff. I may do a couple of bands or something. And if I do that, I may do a quick video on that. I think that would be, pretty cool looking. I may do like a really thick band or something, thick red or a thick blue band, rather than do the stripes like I did down there. So again, you can really be creative here. This is really, yours. That's one of the things about custom rod building, is you can make it look how you want it to look. And you don't have to worry about, convention. I mean, you can make it look very, very classy and very classic. I like a lot of color. I like it to look, very different than something you would buy off the shelf. That's just my personal preference. I think it is the part of this that I like the most, is to make it look very, very unique, to kind of fit my taste. I'm going to loosen that. So again, you want, see how I'm really struggling with this tensioner here. I'm going to loosen that, and some of that is because I have these 2 spacers on. Sometimes it gets a little tight with 2 spacers. Okay, that looks like that'll be pretty good. So what I'll do, like I said, I just kind of eyeball it, about where I want it here. Wrap it around, make sure I come over the top, and make sure I catch it. And here, you're not going up against, winding check. Here what you're doing, and you're probably not going to see much of this up top, but here what you're going to try to do is make sure that use your finger to get everything kind of looking straight. You don't want it to be, cattywampus, this way or whatever. So yeah, this is probably not a great, video here, because you're probably not able to see the red on red. But, I literally did the same thing, but what I'm trying to make sure of is make sure that I have a very perpendicular to my rod, line started here. So now that I've done enough wraps, I can go ahead and cut this extra off. And again, I try to do most of this work, on the bottom side. And here I don't have to be real exact, because I'm going to wrap over that. So there's a little bit sticking out right there. I don't know how well that shows up, but there's a little bit sticking out there, and I'm just going to wrap right over top of that. So it's not a big deal. So I can just keep on going. And so a lot of times when I get close to the guide, I start to slow down, because I want to watch it climb up. And sometimes it'll walk, kind of back toward me. And so I have to take my finger and kind of lift it up and over to make sure that matter of fact, there's one that's trying to wrap on itself right now. So I just take my finger, and try to put it up on the guide a little bit, and do that for a couple of wraps. And you probably can see it a little bit as it's spinning around. You'll see the silver right in between the guides. And this is why we do a lot of the filing, is I can burnish that down. If it was much thicker than that, you'd have a really hard time burnishing that out. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and do a quick little burnish job right here. Because then that way, and I'm using my burnishing tool to just make sure that I get everything kind of tight. And I notice that I got a little looseness up here on this part. And it's definitely trying to wrap on itself right here. So this is why, a lot of times when you're getting up on the guide feet, I just slow down. If I had a power wrapper, I would really slow down through here, and I would probably be real gentle on that foot pedal. And the reality is, if you're power wrapping, this may not even be an issue. It might just ride right on up there. But like I said, this is the part where I typically try to really slow down. And now you can start, undoing the tape, because, that guide is really not going to go anywhere. Again, we can kind of burnish as we go just to see how this is going to look. Go ahead and tighten that down just a little, because I think it's a little loose. It's part of the problem here. Yeah. May have been part of it, as I was a little loose. But sometimes you can kind of burnish it, as you're going along, and you can really kind of see how it's going to, play out. And the thing about it is if the guide's just a little bit off, like I think I got it just a little bit crooked, you can make pretty easy adjustments from here. Until you've put the Pro Coat epoxy on there, you can make some pretty good adjustments on these things. They move around pretty good by hand. So again, I'm just trying to get this thing wrapped. I'm trying to look for about where I'm going to put my braided line, which I have lost. Here it is. Because you're only going to wrap up to the end of this guide. You don't want to over wrap too far. That can actually be a problem. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that I ride it, kind of right up to where the bend happens. And you notice now I'm not having to use my burnishing tool to move the thread, but if you go too far, it'll start wrapping back on itself. And I'm probably right about at that point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put my finger on there so it doesn't go anywhere. I'm going to go ahead and make my cut. And I'm going to thread it down through my braided line. And they make some little tools. A lot of guys use thread, just some spare thread. I have found that the thread is a bit of a problem, in that if I've really wrapped it, and I've done, like here, I've probably done 15 wraps over it, and I try to pull it back and it's very tight, my issue is the thread will actually break. The braided line doesn't break. So I just pull that sucker right back through, no matter how tightly I've wound it. So it makes it very easy to pull that through. And again, just pull a gap. Get my my razor on there and pull. So, and then just do a little bit of burnishing, because what's going to happen is you're going to get a little V pattern, right where you've pulled that under. So what I always try to do is burnish that out just a little bit, kind of get that settled out. And like I said, this burnishing tool will kind of flatten all those threads. Even if you have little gaps, little holes, it'll make it where you don't have any. So let's see if I can get it on there pretty good. So, you know, again, there's just like a little gap right there. Whoops. Little gap right here, not too bad. But, you know, I'm just going to burnish this a little bit more, you know, off camera. But you just want to, you know, make sure that you flattened it out, you know, as much as you possibly can. You know, it's that way it doesn't, you know, show through too much. You don't really want the guide showing through very much. Unless you're Blair Wiggins on his old Flats Blue rods, they use some kind of a non-color fast thread and wrapped over it, pro coated over it, and it almost came out clear and you could see the rod guides. I didn't like that look, honestly. Some people did. I would have done something slightly different than that. I would have got it to at least match the rod. I would have used like a teal wrap. I thought it looked kind of cheesy. You know, made it look very cheap. You know, maybe that's a Wright and McGill thing. I'm glad he's with Lew's now, because I think Lew's makes a lot better product. I really like their rods and reels. I think they've always been kind of known for quality from what I remember growing up. But they seem to have gained some popularity here recently. So what I'm probably going to do now, little trick I've learned, and I'm not great at it, but let me just a second here. Get one of my little mixing sticks. I think I'm going to make a little white trim band for right here. Like I said, I'm not great at this trick, but I'm going to give it a go. So what you can do is you can tape a mixing stick or a toothpick or whatever on the rod. What you can do is you can do, you know, several wraps here, you know, as thick as you want the band. So here, let's say I want to do a 4 wrap band. All right. So I can hold this in place. Let's see if I can figure out a way to be able to actually show you this. But basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap it under, and then the thread that's on this side, I'm going to pull under this way. The thread that's on that side, I'm going to pull under this way, and I'm going to pull them tight. And I'm going to take the stick out, and I'm actually going to, you know, run it right down against the, matter of fact, that may be part of my problem here, is I'm going to run it right down against that red thread. So anyway, let's see if I can do this. So one, I haven't done this in a while, so I'm kind of ad-libbing. Seeing me struggle with this a little bit on camera. But anyway, you do it 4 times. You'll probably have to see it from above. I'm going to go one more to make it truly 4. All right, so I have 4 wraps. Now I'm going to run this up under here. There's actually another way to do this. You can actually, kind of like what I was doing with my tape on the striping, you could have done it that way too. You can actually, you know, wrap this at the same time, but like I said, this is something this is like an after the fact thing, like, hey, I want to throw a trim band on here real quick and I forgot to do that. You know, this gives you that opportunity to do that and lock it in. As you can see, it's getting all, you know, haywire, but the reality is I'm going to be able to pull this tight. Because as long as you get it on there and you pull it tight, we can always use the burnishing tool or something to, you know, do a little bit of adjustment. But again, you just want to take it, pull it tight, and then try to get it, you know, straightened back up as you get it right up against this, the thread that you have. That's good and tight there. Now, one thing I will caution you about when you do these kind of trim bands is they are not extremely, you know, they're not going to hold extremely well. All right, so sometimes I actually wait and do these like right at the end, right before I do the Pro Coat, because then what I can make sure of is, looks like this thing's kind of wrapped on top of itself. That's why it's not tightening. Because then that way I don't have to worry about if it comes a little loose. It's not a big deal. And my wife is heading to bed, so I'm going to have to get off here in a second and tell her goodnight. And I love her. Make sure you do those things with your wife. All right, so basically all I do is I just trim that up, and boom, I got trim bands.